Welcome to Storycast Rob's Geek Week, and today we're talking about something very close to my heart, because we are talking superheroes. Hello again, welcome to the Geek Week. This week I'll be producing a video every single day where I talk about geek properties which are close to my heart. And today we're delving into the world of superheroes. At the end of the video I'm going to do a very quick Captain Marvel review, spoiler review, but I'll give you a warning before it starts. But before I do that, I want to talk about me and my relationship with comic books and superheroes in particular. My first comic book actually was a Star Wars comic book. It was an adaptation of the very first Star Wars movie, released by Marvel in the UK anyway, in weekly parts. And I bought that. It must have been Star Wars issue like 3, I think. And I was very excited by the spaceships and the laser guns and all that kind of stuff that was in there, the robots. But my dad was a little bit disappointed. He himself was a huge comic book fan in his youth, and he wasn't necessarily approving of me going off and reading space comics as a starting point. This was before Star Wars was a thing. We're talking 76, 77. So, you know, nobody knew what a phenomenon it was going to be. So my dad went and bought me some comic books. Bought me some approved comic books, and because he was a DC head, the first comic books he bought me were Green Lantern and Justice League. I'm going to see if I can find a cover and put it in here. And that, I guess, really began my love affair with comic books, and particularly with DC. Because my dad was a DC fan, I'm a DC fan, and that is my life, really, and that is how my journey began. My favourite heroes, Flash, Green Lantern, Firestorm. Alright, well, I'm over that now. Apparently my Groot did not approve of my DC fandom. That is something of a shame. We'll just put him down over here somewhere. But I will return my Captain America to the corner, and he can watch over the rest of this video. What was I saying before Groot committed suicide? Oh yeah, so my favourite comic book heroes were always DC. But actually, it was a lot easier in my youth to find Marvel comics here in the UK anyway, because Marvel UK was a thing and they were releasing comic books on a weekly basis. So I read a lot of Marvel as well. I read a lot of reprints of Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men, all of these things. Marvel UK printed reprints of. So we were getting this would have been in the late 70s, early 80s. We were getting a lot of early 1960 comic books reprints, and I loved them. I have to say, looking back at them now, the comic book industry has come a long way since then, and it's actually quite hard to read 60s comics now that we've seen comics which are produced in the 2000s. But nevertheless, still quite interesting, still quite fun. My favourite movies growing up as a kid were the Star Wars movies, but beyond those, Christopher Reeve's Superman, Tim Burton's Batman, fantastic stuff, really enjoyed them. And when the comic book movie took off with I guess sort of with the X-Men maybe, Blade before it, I was all in for that. And I could not be more excited for the Marvel Cinematic Universe to do its thing, except possibly by the DC Universe doing its thing. Except I don't really think DC has started doing its thing yet. That's not true, actually. Wonder Woman and Aquaman, both successes, both good films, enjoyed them both thoroughly. Justice League and Suicide Squad, I enjoyed them more than most, I suspect. BVS, I tolerate. Man of Steel I really, really, really don't like. Man of Steel I dislike more than BVS, which I know is in some quarters quite controversial. But I got distracted. Comic books is what I was talking about, not movies. And comic books have been a lifelong passion of mine. I have collected comic books since my dad got me those first ones in the late 70s. All the way up until, I'm still buying comic books now, although for space issues and having moved to a different country a few years ago, generally speaking these days I'm buying them on Comixology rather than in paper format, because space and weight and just generally I still have literally thousands of comic books at my parents' house. They keep making me come and review them to throw them out. I've been digging my heels in. They are eventually going to have to go, sadly, but I am going to rescue a tiny percentage of my favourites. That is the plan anyway. I love comic books. I love the serialization of them. I love picking them up and seeing where they're going next. I love the long-form narrative style that modern comic books have. Very rare now do you get a comic tell a story in a single issue. Actually, my favourite comic book ever did just that. Justice League issue 200, and I will put an image of that over my shoulder. Really enjoyed that. One of my favourite comic books ever. And if I wasn't a DC fan before it, I certainly was after that. Seeing the sort of original lineup of the Justice League and the Satellite era Justice League clash heads in this one big book was amazing. It didn't require a 6-issue miniseries to tell that story. It just told one oversized issue, and it was brilliant. But despite my DC bias, that doesn't mean I dislike Marvel. I'm a huge Marvel fan as well. Spider-Man, X-Men, both my favourite characters before the MCU. As a whole new kind of take on the character with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and been thrilled by all of those movies. Well, mostly thrilled by those movies. So I think it's time probably to get to the other half of today's video, which is to give a spoiler review of Captain Marvel. We saw that at the weekend. My wife and I went together at the little cinema in Järvenpää here in Finland. And the non-spoiler version of the review is that I quite enjoyed it, but I wasn't really blown away by it. I would probably put it somewhere in the mid-level of the Marvel movies, I guess. There are certainly movies within the franchise that are not as good as it. They've just gotten better at telling that kind of story in more recent years. But there are so many movies which are so far ahead of it. So, non-spoiler version, there we go. It was alright. So let's talk spoilers. So what worked for me and what didn't work for me in Captain Marvel? What worked for me, I think, my favourite element of the story was actually Ben Mendelsohn's Talos character, the Skrull leader. The Skrulls are a strange alien race in the comic books, and have always been just a little bit goofy in appearance. So playing them a little bit for laughs in this movie wasn't so far adrift. And it made Ben Mendelsohn's character really interesting. Because, of course, again, spoilers, we start the movie believing the Skrulls are going to be the bad guys, and then we have the midpoint change where it's revealed that the Kree are really the people who are behind all the bad stuff, and the Skrulls are just trying to get by. It's a strange kind of... It's a bit weird that we have the sort of shape-changing gimmick of the Skrulls being attested to good guys, because where the shape-changing thing gets really good is like in the Secret Invasion comic books, where there are Skrulls posing as people, and the big question of who do we trust, who do we know, who's really a Skrull, who's really not. really didn't play that up very much in this version of the Skrulls. We saw a bit of it, but mostly again for comic effect. The old lady, the Skrull who was posing as Coulson. That was quite funny. Shame he died, really. And so we didn't really. It's a sinister power, and it wasn't played as such. So I think that was a missed opportunity. But I guess if you're going to make them sympathetic, it's hard for them also to be scary. I think they should have worked harder to find a way. What didn't work for me, I wasn't a fan of. I want to be really careful when I'm saying this. I was not a big fan of Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. This is not me saying she was a bad choice. This is not me saying it was necessarily a bad performance. And I'm not in any way ascribing myself to that part of the fan base that were dead set against Captain Marvel, the woman leading an MCU. None of that. I just thought that Brie Larson kind of underplays Carol Danvers a bit. And I would have liked to have seen just a shade more emotion from, particularly because Yon Rogg, played by Jude Law, kept going on about it. She was being too emotional. Well, she clearly wasn't. I did like her. I liked the show of emotion. She had quite a nice, wry sense of humour at various points. Her interaction with the young Monica Rambeau was really nice. And her relationship with Lawson was also quite interesting too. But I just didn't connect to her. Now, in this particular instance, unlike with Doctor Who, where I was more in favour of Jodie Whittaker than my wife said she really enjoyed Brie Larson's performance. So, horses for courses, really. I'm not dead set against it. It wasn't awful. I was just hoping for a little bit more. The de-aging makeup, special effects on Coulson and Fury was quite well done. Wasn't terribly distracting at all. I thought it was nice to have Fury having such a big role in a movie for a change. We haven't really seen very much of that. But I thought the way that he lost his eye was very, very disappointing. I mean, there was a lot of chatter about it happening this way, with the Flurkin cat being the one to scratch his eye. But as far as I can say, just kind of scratched his eyebrow. And I don't see why that would have made things worse. And there was a very weird moment. Did you notice that when he loses or gets the scratch from the Flurkin, he says, "Oh no, it's just a scratch," and Talos goes, "No," as if to imply that there is something really dangerous or unpredictable, maybe, about a scratch from a Flurkin. Is there more to that? Does this mean that there is more to Fury's eye than we've seen so far? Possibly, but probably not. Did it connect to Endgame? Well, I mean, kind of. There was the end credits bit where Endgame was a factor. I suspect we'll see that scene again, but not at the start of Endgame. I would guess at about a third of the way through, so maybe the end of Act 1, possibly. I was thinking about this, having watched a couple of other reviews for Captain Marvel, and it's really interesting that Captain Marvel is powered by the Tesseract, essentially. And I'm just wondering how many Marvel characters, how many Avengers characters, derive their powers from the Infinity Stones, from the good guys' side. And is that going to be a factor when we come to defeat Thanos in Endgame? Obviously, we have the Mind Gem powering Vision. We have the Space Gem now powering Captain Marvel. The Time Gem being strongly linked to Doctor Strange. The Soul Gem, I mean, arguably connected to Gamora now. Reality, not an obvious choice for the Reality Gem, I don't think. I mean, possibly Thor because it was in Dark World, but I don't know that unless we see Jane Foster back using the power of the Reality Stone, possibly not. The Power Gem. Anyway, no, sorry. This is me ideating fan theories on camera. I should probably not do that. But I'm just wondering whether there is something in that, because there are enough heroes that are powered now by the different Infinity Stones, that might become a factor in Endgame. Let's find out, shall we? Anyway, thank you for watching. That is it for me today. That is the end of my review of Captain Marvel. As I say, it was alright. I wasn't blown away by it, but it was alright. If you want to find more about me and my geekery, check out the playlist for the Geek Week over there. If you want to find out about me and Doctor Who, check out the playlist over here. And I'll catch you next time. Cheers.